factor this monomial completely, the first thing we need to do is worry about the negative sign. If there's a negative sign, we say that there's a -1 that's a factor. Next, we need to factor the coefficient. One way that we can do that is by making a factor tree. And you just keep factoring in until you get down to primes. So here I've got my prime numbers. 2 times 2 times 3 is 12. So I'm going to write them out. Today is the only day when we're going to be writing it out like this. In future days, we're going to write 2 squared times 3. Next, we need to factor our variables. A to the 5th is just the same thing as A times A times A times A times A. And B cubed is just the same thing as B times B times B. We're done. There we go. Here are the steps. Step 1, first look at the negative sign. If there's a negative sign, factor out a -1. Second step, factor the coefficient until you have primes. Third step, factor your variables. Let's do it again down here. We have a negative sign, so your first factor is -1. Next, we have 66 as the coefficient. You could do this in your head, but it might be easier if you make a factor tree. Okay, 66 is the same thing as 11 times 3 times 2. I'm going to write it in ascending order because it helps to keep everything nice and neat. Okay, now we're going to look at our variables. I've got 1p, and I have q squared, which is the same thing as q times q. Done. Moving on. The second objective is to find the greatest common factor of 2 monomials. So here we have 2 monomials, 1 and 2. We're going to start with 36x squared times y. First step is to factor each monomial completely. So let's start with 36x squared y. There's no negative sign, so we need to factor the coefficient, which is 36. I'm going to do it with a factor tree. We've got 12 times 3, 4 times 3, 2 times 2. So 36 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. Now I factor x squared, which is x times y. Now we put 54x y squared z, which is a mouthful. First step, there's no negative sign. Second step, coefficient. So we're going to factor, I need a factor tree. Let me just make a little space. Okay. Here's my factor tree for 54. Two numbers that multiply to 54 are 9 and 6. 9 factors to 3 times 3. 6 is 3 times 2. So in ascending order, we've got 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. And now we do our variables, which is x. Y squared is the same thing as y times y, and then z. I like to make a little crosshatch to make sure my z's don't get confused with my 2's if I'm really quick. Second step in finding the greatest common factor is to find the biggest factor that both monomials have. So we're looking for parts that they both have. I'm going to switch pen colors here. I can't see my pen colors. There it is. Okay. So when I put these two side by side, I can see that they both have a 2. They both have 2 sets of 3. They both have an X. They both have a Y. So what they both have is 2 times 3 times 3, which is 18. And for the variables, they both have x, y. So they both have 18xy. That is the greatest common factor that they both have. The 2 and the 3 and the x and the y that are and the z that are left over, don't worry about those today. That's what we're going to deal with tomorrow. This is the greatest common factor. Okay, here are the steps. First, factor each monomial completely. That's what we did here and here. Then find the factors that each term has in common. That's what we circled. Third step, multiply the common factors together to find the GCF. That's when we multiplied 2 times 3 times 3 times x times y. Okay. Let me give you another example down here. We've got 12QR, no negative sign. So I need to factor my 12. 4, 3. I get 2 times 2 times 3. Now the variables times q times r. Now let's factor 8r squared. 8, of course, is just 4 times 2. So we end up with 2 times 2 times 2 times r times r. Second step, find the factors that each term has in common. Well, they both have 2 2's, and they both have an r. Third step, multiply the common factors to find the greatest common factor. 2 times 2 is 4, of course, times r makes 4r. This is your greatest common factor.